balance, so that there's a good work for the interpreters for the both sides. Thanks very much for the invitation to speak today, and I think I'd like to start by saying that for the European Trade Union Confederation, we see industrial policy, something that we've been fighting for a long time at European level, a coordinated, coherent European industrial policy. But we see both in the industrial policy at European level and the European single market as tools rather than ends in themselves. They're means to an end. And the end that we want to see is prosperity in Europe and the creation and maintenance of millions of jobs. And I think today it's very important to put that in the context of the economic crisis that we're in the middle of. An economic crisis which has resulted in mass unemployment, over 26 million unemployed in Europe, a social catastrophe amongst our young, over a quarter of young in Europe, 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 young in Europe unemployed, more than half of the Spanish and Greek young workforce unemployed. These are challenges which our economies will take a long time to overcome. And therefore we need, and there I would reiterate one of the points made, a balanced economy, a balance between services, public services, private services, industry, and commerce and so on. But we also need a rebalancing of interests at European level. And there I think it's really important, the message that Michel brought about the need to move away from this laissez-faire neoliberal approach. We need a rebalancing of the interests of business and workers. We need, in those terms, in the single market, exactly as Bernd has just said, a social protocol, social progress protocol, which balances the freedoms of workers with the freedoms of the market, or the rights of workers with the freedoms of the market. But we need an industrial policy which at the same time addresses the megatrends that we face, demographic change, climate change, and so on, and sees working people really as the driver of the economy. And that means we need a strong social dimension also to industrial policy. We always hear that the social dimension is in the light of restructuring. If we think about the example of the coal and steel community, it was restructuring which was the social dimension. But we need to take a broader social dimension to industrial policy. It has to be an agenda which is about worker innovation. It's innovation in the workplace which drives that agenda of R&D and broader innovation policies. We have to have an agenda in terms of anticipation, and there the European Parliament adopted an extremely important report in January, which was drafted by Alejandro Cercas, on a European framework for the anticipation of change and restructuring, which is an agenda about skills and training. We need rights in relation to vocational training, particularly for the lowest skilled in our society. If we're going to make this leap to the key enabling technologies, then we have to bring a lot of people with us, also in the deployment of technologies, and that means big investments in training and education. And all of that depends on a strong basis of worker participation and dialogue. And there, I'll wrap up because I know we're tight on time, but there, the reality on the ground today in Europe runs completely counter to much of what's been said at this top table. What we're seeing is an undermining and a dismantling of our collective bargaining systems, a dismantling of social dialogue systems at the national level. If we look at what's happening, particularly in the implementation of austerity measures, then the dismantling of social dialogue is actually running completely counter to the level of dialogue that we need to make this big third industrial revolution linked to climate change or linked to technological change or demographic change. So we need to rethink what that social dimension of industrial policy is and build the instruments and support the institutions which are pushing it. All of that to say that we can talk a lot about industrial policy, but unless we create a coordinated approach with other policy areas, and I agree with what Bernd said about coordination in the Commission, I think the area which hasn't had a lot of attention today so far is the macroeconomic policy pursued by the European Union currently. And it's clear, and we know from the reports of the IMF in October last year, that fiscal stimulus would actually put a lot more into the European economy than is recognised by the Commission. And the fiscal austerity that we're facing is stripping a lot more out of our economy than is recognised by the European Commission. So what we need is an agenda which is about investment, structural investments in our sectors. We have some of that broad strategy. I think the roadmaps linked to the Roadmap 2050 provide quite a good framework for directing, and sectors have developed their own sectoral framework roadmaps to 2050. We know which technologies need to be invested in. We know which R&D projects need to be pushed forward. We now need to link the investment to that industrial policy agenda, and that means not just relying on the private sector. It means we currently are in the middle of an investment strike, effectively, by companies. So we need to build the public investment tools, which then unlock the private capital to push forward this industrial policy agenda. That's the strategy of the trade union movement. I'm not saying that there isn't competition between workers when it comes to different industries in different countries, but what we should be building at European level are the European common rules and a common agenda which pushes all in the right direction and emphasise our regional specificities and our regional and local assets and advantages. And that has to be an agenda which is about the high road and not an agenda about the low road and this continuous fixation on unit labour costs. Unit labour costs are only one element. Let's focus on reducing energy, increasing energy efficiency, increasing resource efficiency, and tackling what are really the big issues for industry, not the additional issues. Thank you.
De montrer qu'entre les volontés et les réalités, là aussi l'écart quelquefois se creuse, et que ce que tu dis sur les spécificités nationales, donc faire des atouts dans la coopération ou le développement, c'est effectivement extrêmement important. Je reviens avec mon problème de l'énergie qui est au cœur aussi de la compétitivité industrielle. Il est bien évident que si on arrivait à